Welcome to the next video in my series, and it's been a very busy week, and we're going to look at the EU and England again, and we're also going to look briefly at some of the other countries, and I'm going to explain to you why I believe that the EU dream as a federal state is finished. The writing is on the wall. Pardon the pun, like the Berlin Wall. Everything's going to collapse, and it's going to collapse in front of our eyes and fairly quickly, I believe. Now, let's look at the scenario as it is today. In a previous video I said that Abraham Lincoln had said that a house divided can't stand. Well, as of the last couple of weeks, France has now come into the mix as well with massive social problems and a president that's deeply unpopular and is more than likely going to be unseated. So there is always the possibility that not only May will exit in the United Kingdom, but also Macron will be forced out because he is deeply unpopular for obvious reasons that anyone can see. Now, let's look at the problem countries as we see them. We have the United Kingdom, which is breaking up, quite literally, in terms of breaking up with the union with the EU. So it's having a divorce, and it's a nasty divorce at the moment. Italy, major problem as far as the deficits are concerned, as far as the population is concerned. There are separatist movements within Italy. France, as I've just alluded to a few minutes ago, massive problems in France. Not only budget, but the burden of taxation, its ability to be competitive. It's a mess. Well, the whole EU is a mess, except potentially Germany, but even it has some problems, which I'm going to touch on later. And then we have Spain, which is literally disintegrating before our eyes. And we have the Eastern European movements, which are rebelling in terms of the social aspect as far as the immigration quotas that are being imposed from the centre. We have Greece, which is still languishing and still a potential problem in the background. And one which is a very serious one that's linked to Brexit, which I'm going to cover in a video very soon, is Ireland. And that's one to watch out for. Now, in the whole scheme of things, why is there such a problem in the EU? Well, the EU is a false construct. It's not a nation. It's an ideology more than anything else. And it's an ideology that has been constructed on the back of the gravy train, in my belief, of bureaucrats. Now, I don't want this necessarily to be a political series of videos, not at all. Strategian is an investment company, but what happens in politics does affect investments, and certainly what happens in Europe affects investments everywhere else in the world because it's so connected. Now, let's go through some of these problems. Now, Italy has got major problems. Italy's got bank solvency problems. It's got political problems. It's got a populist government that, for example, wants to pay people who don't have any work €800 a month, basically for doing nothing. But that, they say, is to kickstart the economy in some sort of Keynesian fashion. Well, you know, to do that, they were looking at a 2.4% budget deficit, and now with so-called negotiations, they're looking at a 2% and thinking that's great. Well, the EU just can't budge because after Italy, Spain, Greece, Ireland, France, they're all going to look for breaking the budget constraints, which, to be honest with you, is ridiculous because at the end of the day, Germany is the only beneficial partner of benefiter of these budget restraints. So other economies within Europe are completely constricted because of competitive disadvantages. They can't devalue currencies, they can't do anything. They're locked in a straitjacket. So in a way, it's in Germany's interest to make sure that these particular countries do have austerity budgets, because it means that Germany as a nation doesn't have to finance large deficits, which it ultimately would have to do. And at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, it's Germany that influences the ECB, even though it's supposed to be independent. It's not. Okay. Now, we also have the UK leaving, and that has got serious consequences because, you see, with the UK leaving, if it's a success story, it sends a signal to Italy, it sends a signal to Spain, to other countries, or Poland, other countries, that they can go it alone. They don't need the bureaucracy. And along the way, happened in the early 90s in the EU, it lost its way. The bureaucrats decided they're going to make this a political entity. They're going to have more power. They're going to change this from a European economic zone, which was free trade, no barriers to trade, without the political constraints. And that worked perfectly well, but the politicians, as usual, had to mess things up for the economy in general. So what we've inherited is a political desire for greater power without a political will to make more efficient economies. And this is what we have inherited in today's situation with the EU. So what we've seen is, particularly in France, we've seen higher taxation, but disenfranchised citizens, where money has been transferred through very, very loose monetary conditions to a higher echelon in society where it really hasn't trickled down, no matter what some economists like Krugman tell you. There has been no trickle down. If there was, there wouldn't be social unrest in Europe. Where there's social unrest, there's usually economic problems, always underneath the scenes, and the so-called elites haven't seen this, and this is why there's major, major problems coming up in Europe in the future. So we have Germany. I've mentioned that Germany has some problems coming up. Well, Germany has got problems with banks. And in particular, one bank, which is common knowledge, is Deutsche Bank, is having major, major problems at the moment. And that's going to be a subject of a further video, the banking system in Europe, but in particular Germany. So this is important because, you see, as these dominoes start to fall, where's the mechanism for funding these bailouts? If German banks or French banks or Italian banks are really in a bad condition, it's only a matter of time before this whole edifice falls down. So we have a real problem with disconnected elites that think that they can completely print money to make the populations content. Well, people aren't stupid. They can see that money's been printed, but it isn't going anywhere, or money has been printed and it hasn't got anywhere but the banks. Now, I'm not saying that, a political comment here. I'm just facing reality, which a lot of people and economists aren't facing reality because they don't study history. If economists and elites studied history more than so-called economics, which in its way is an undefined science, then I think we would have avoided most of these problems in the first place. So, going back to England and the Brexit, and we now know that, I believe completely that the United Kingdom, the Parliament in the United Kingdom is not going to vote through a bad deal, what is an extremely bad deal, which makes Britain a vassal state. Now, I know I'm going to get political comments from this, but sometimes you do have to make political comments, because what this means is that Britain is going to have a no-deal situation in March. Now, I can see people putting up their hands, and I can see comments on the thing, this is, Britain's better in the EU. Well, actually, a messy divorce is one that's not clean. The best thing for Britain would be a no deal, because that would allow Britain, for example, to make its own deals and its own trade things. And let's be blunt about this. Britain has only 9% of its economy that's manufacturing. So it imports everything else, and the vast majority of imports that Britain imports is from the European Union. So to play a spoilt child, it's not going to wear it with German automakers, with French automakers. And, for example, car makers in the United Kingdom, the British don't even own their own car makers. For example, there's the Nissan plant in Sunderland, there's the Honda plant in Swindon, there's all sorts of manufacturing that's foreign-owned. So it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. It just exports very little manufactured goods to Europe. And as far as services are concerned, well, the banking industry, yes, that's very important, but that's not going to change. It's because of the channels that have already been developed are not going to be easily superseded by any banking organisation, even out of Frankfurt in Germany, because, as I said, the German banks are in no shape to go and create a whole new financial centre like London is. So that's a little bit of a moot point. Now, the other thing about it is that the bureaucrats in Europe are terrified of a successful Brexit, and especially a clean Brexit, because what it means is the death of the European Union as a political experiment, not necessarily an economic one. What it means in the future is there's just going to have to be an annihilation, in my view, of the bureaucrats who are effectively strangling competitiveness within the European Union. So what does this mean from an investment point of view? Well, what it means is two things: that the English economy is going to have a short-term effect on this, but it's going to come out smelling like roses once the new trade deals are done, once the shackles of over-regulation are done, are finished. It's just going to be like, to me, a light that starts to shine brighter as a new liberation is there with more laissez-faire economics. Now, it's not an ideal world, because there are obviously things wrong with a so-called rampant capitalist economy, and there's definitely things wrong with the Western model of socialism, because it completely corrupts growth. It dies through atrophy. So I see the breakup of Europe, and it's going to happen fairly quickly, because countries like France, Germany, Italy, Spain, these are disuniting very, very quickly. It goes back again to Abraham Lincoln's statement that I mentioned at the beginning: a house divided cannot stand. And these bureaucrats, in particular, the so-called economic elites who are feeding the engines of conglomerates, don't understand that nationalist movements are the things that break up globalist supply lines. And at the end of the day, these supply lines, they'll be replaced or amended to suit the political and economic situation. But what this means for US investors is that Britain will, after the Brexit, be a much better investment base than Europe will be. Britain will have a stronger currency as it rebounds from the bottom, and it'll be freer to make its own trade deals. So therefore investments into England should be better. So, and what does this mean for Europe? It means a disastrous future for the euro, if it has a future. It means that investment opportunities, because of the political instability, are going to be limited. And worse still, as the fragmentation occurs, risk will have to be re-evaluated for, especially I keep on hammering about these sovereign bonds, but if the European Union breaks up, what happens to all these sovereign bonds? There's already 200 trillion in the world of debt, and you start adding the European sovereign bonds and the banks that are exposed to these sovereign bonds, and there's possibly what happens if Italy exit the European Union? What happens to all those sovereign bonds? If Spain breaks up, the Catalonia district, it has a major responsibility for a portion of the debt of Spain. So who starts paying for that? It's a nightmare. So you have to be so wary of Europe, because when the dominoes start falling in Europe, you can be rest assured that financial contagion and illiquidity is going to be one of the major results. And I keep warning about this, because for many people like myself, it's apparent, and you need to make sure that when you start putting together your portfolios, you do have liquidity and you do lessen your exposure as things get worse in Europe to Europe. So I hope that this is of further information to you. Yes, I know that this will be counter to some people's economic view of the world, but in Strategian, we take a hard look at things, see what's coming in the future, and try to inform you, the investor, of what's going on, so as you can perform adequate strategic planning for your portfolios. That's what we're all about. So please subscribe to my channel and like this video, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you, and bye.